Alright, so my point is that everything is a sombrero, by which I mean conference report and Professor Anton both talked about this idea, of what are the things, like in the case of the Higgs boson, and when we believe that they are things and we're looking for them, and then Anton is talking in general, how do we really know when we name something, and if we give it an illusion of definiteness, that it is a thing, and we grant that. And I just made a video about this that basically gets to the point. I mean, I think with relativism and skepticism, both from the same kind of epistemological point of view, maybe indistinct even, the point is that we see relationships, right? We see relationships that we have with things. So a color, for example, if something looks red, that's really just our end of a relationship we have in terms of light. And all properties are like this, and really what we have therefore is relationships, ultimately always relationship with us. But we can simulate getting other people's relationships, right, because somebody else can have an experience. But when they relate that in language to you, then you are still having to have that experience indirectly. Ultimately, it has to be like that. But there is triangulation. You can move over time your own point of view and get different, in different situations where your relationship to a thing changes, and you can see more of the potential thing, right? You can expand that. But fundamentally, there's always more details. And it's not about infinite properties, it's about infinite relationships. Relationships that change over time, because they're not just based on the thing, but they're based on what's observing it or just interacting with it. So everything is a sombrero, because all things are just these property generators, which are really relationship having essences. And the idea that they're things is pretty much obviously not the case. We call them things so we can just say, okay, let's stop there and use that and assume that. But in reality, whenever we look at a thing, it always breaks down into parts. So we could say the things are the parts and they have relationships again. And I think that that's always the case. You can always break things down that way and transform them into something else. So we mentally want to use things so we can choose a scale and work there, right? But that's just how we information process it. It's a software construct, basically. In reality, things are just webs of relationships. And how could that possibly be? Don't you need a thing to have relationships? Well, you might need some sort of entity, but it's just not much like a thing. It's a field. Fields can have relationships with themselves over time, oscillations, right? And that seems to be what things are made of. So, yeah, that's my input on that. So don't believe in things. Believe in oh yeah, I was going to add. So you don't believe in things, you believe in the relationships. In the case of the Higgs boson, that means you got to look at what the relationship is. Now, the relationship, if it's a real thing, is that it provides a way for, a universe that should just be made up of things like photons shooting through each other. They get heavy and have mass, and friction kicks in, all kinds of stuff kicks in, and the question is, what causes that, right? So that would be its relation. But on the other hand, what its real relation is right now, well, it's indirect. That's why they call it indirect, because they have the standard model, and it's predicted a bunch of particles, all of which have been observed except for the Higgs, I believe. Not the supersymmetry and stuff. There's all kinds of particles that haven't been. I think none of those particles have been observed. But so, the relationship is that we have a mathematical system that has explained everything we have seen, predicted some things that we have now seen, and this particle is implied by that system. So that's considered indirect. It's like when Einstein had his theory of relativity, it all made sense, and there was reason to believe it because it used logical arguments that had been so sound before. But it was considered seen directly when it made a prediction that could be confirmed, like that light was bent by the sun, gravitational lensing. So yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of mathematical relationships pointing to the idea that there should be an empty space. In other words, there should be a place here in the universe that has relationships to us, and in that sense can generate properties, right? So the appearance of properties, and that's what they're trying to see. And if it's not there, then that'll affect the system, and if it is there, then it'll really affect the system. And people don't really get it. It's like, if they figure out how these things work and can manipulate this field, then we're talking, you know, an anti-gravity era of technology. You know, we're talking about getting into, you know, kind of that real future tech that science fiction has talked about. So it'd be a pretty big thing. I mean, if it's possible, we might just prove that that kind of thing isn't possible, but I have a feeling there's a lot possible.